young men gone? Long time passing, where have all the young men gone? Long time ago, where have all the young men gone? Gone to soldiers, everyone. When will they ever learn? When will they ever learn? Where have all the soldiers gone? Long time passing. Where have all the soldiers gone? Long time ago. Where have all the soldiers gone? Gone to graveyards, everyone. When will they ever learn? When will they ever learn?
Voila. And may that light remind us of the light that is always in our heart. We look forward to the time when the power of love replaces the love of power. Then will our world know the blessings of peace. Let me introduce you to someone who needs no introduction, our beloved Charlene.
So there are a lot of readings, but one just kept coming back to me over and over. So this is the one reading I chose. It comes from MASH, that series that took place in the Korean War, if you're not familiar with it, about surgeons that were near the front line and all the horrific things they had to deal with. So in this scene, they're all in the operating room where a nearby village has been bombed and children and civilians are being operated on. And Frank Burns says, well, everyone knows war is hell. And Hawkeye replies, war isn't hell. War is war and hell is hell. And of the two, war is a lot worse. And Father McKay says, how do you figure so, Hawkeye? Hawkeye said, easy, Father. Tell me, who goes to hell? Sinners, I believe. Exactly. There are no innocent bystanders in hell. War is chock full of them. Little kids, cripples, old ladies. In fact, except for some of the brass, almost everybody involved is an innocent bystander. There are so many atrocities that have happened to civilians in war that we could be here all weekend with it. But we chose just a few stories to illustrate some of the side effects of war we don't always acknowledge, especially during Memorial Day. So my part is about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In August 1945, the United States government dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Immediately, approximately 120,000 people died. Those at the center were vaporized by the intense heat. Others were killed by shock waves, falling buildings, radiation, and thermal burns, and injuries from flying debris. In the following months, many more died excruciatingly painful deaths from radiation and thermal burns and the resulting infections, and from vomiting, diarrhea, dehydration, and malnutrition. Those that survived suffered from health effects. Most notable were leukemia from damage to their bone marrow. The survivors were called hibakusha, and it was not an honorary term. Society was afraid of them. Some thought they were contagious. Employers didn't want disfigured people working for them. Marriage prospects were few, as it was thought their children could be mutated. Fortunately, decades of research have shown that there weren't mutations in their genomes. For those reasons, many survivors did not tell anyone what they had gone through. The Japanese government set up hospitals and invited some of the hibakusha for treatment, But while the patients were diagnosed, they were not given their diagnosis or treatment. They instead were studied unwillingly to learn the long-term effects of radiation exposure. There are some of the hibakusha still alive today that were children when the bombs were dropped, and they're now in their 80s and 90s. Beginning late in the 20th century, survivors began telling their stories so that the horrors of these bombs would be known. Whether the bombings were a war crime or international crimes against humanity continues to be debated today. But Dawn, would you go change places with Mike? Mike was the speaker today, then also on security duties. He'll be up here in just a minute.
That's a flute. That's not a trumpet.
I was skilled in that.
I'm sorry. I'm making jokes, but this is a very serious matter we're talking about. My role here is to talk about the economic consequences of war, and I'm drawing a lot of this from an article from the Center of Global Development. It's called "The Iran War Oil Shock Will Hit the Hungry Hardest." And they propose that cash is the best response. But before I talk about the modern day, what's happening right now, I think I should put it in some historical context. We here in this country have largely avoided the consequences of war over the past 140 years. We have been the benefactors in a way. Particularly after World War I, Europe was devastated. We didn't suffer any infrastructure damage, any civilian deaths, non-combatant deaths, while Europe, millions died. After the war, they were all in debt. They were all in debt. Our allies were in debt to us, and we expected to be paid back. We were the major economic force in the world after World War I, and the economic hardship, particularly in Germany, who were suffering from war reparations, helped Hitler and the Nazi Party come to power. It was a result of the unsettled peace from World War I and the economic consequences. After World War II, the United States was a superpower, the economic superpower. Britain was bankrupt. If it weren't for the United States bankrolling them, they would have been devastated. They would have suffered famine. But our aid was not without conditions. We were able to extract assets from England, from Britain, and they had to pay us back loans. It was only just recently that Britain paid back all the loans incurred during World War II. So with this economic power, we didn't need large-scale military operations. We had sanctions. We could use our economic power to put our hands on the wheels of the new world order. Of course, we had opposition, we had adversaries, and largely we used economic means and some small guerrilla wars to manage that. So here we are now. There's a war in Iran. It was mainly from Israeli and the Muslim adversaries, Iran in particular, and the terrorist groups And so that war now has become, even though we funded the war machine of Israel with good intentions, mainly, now that war machine has involved us in that war. And what is going to be we're concerned about the economic effect on us, mainly, and here's what I'm going to draw on, mainly on our fuel prices. We're concerned about the gasoline. I don't see a whole lot of sacrifice right now from our side. The stock market is still betting on the future. It's very unlikely that, according to this article, that we're going to enter a recession because our employment is still steady and our inflation is under control. We might enter some stagnation, which we experienced in the 70s. I remember that. When interest rates go high, as inflation continues. But the rest of the world, particularly the poor countries, are going to feel it the most. High oil prices translate into higher food prices. Food, it affects countries that have to import fuel and import food the most. I don't have it right here, but there's like 6 countries, mainly in Africa, that are going to be affected. Now, the economic effects are going to affect many countries as far as their output. India right now is wondering what it's going to do. China is even worried because it has to sell, and who's it going to sell to if people don't have money? So we're going to be suffering as far as our manufacturing, our economy. But the poorest of the poor, they're going to be starving. Nitrogen fertilizer is almost entirely made up of petroleum products. Their prices typically track oil prices. 1/5 of the global liquid natural gas supplies pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Continued destruction could cause a spike in ammonia and urea prices well before the next planting season. So what does this mean? When fertilizer becomes more expensive, the next harvest becomes smaller, costlier. Some countries are going to be unable to get that supply in a meaningful way. They're going to have to compete with countries that have money to pay the higher price. Also, the transportation within those countries is going to be affected. So they can't get the food and fertilizer to the farmers that need it. So the full effects of this fertilizer price spiking won't be felt until next harvest season, 6 to 12 months later. It's going to be famine. There's already famine in the world, but there are many countries that are close to famine. 40% of the population is on the verge of not having food to eat in these 6 countries. So what do they say? How can we avoid this? The countries that have cash need to be willing to contribute to not just a general giving money, because that doesn't really help. In fact, sometimes it can hurt because the money doesn't help the people in their own self-sufficiently. See, what they propose, because people who have micro businesses, a lot of women, because the world has been investing in women's enterprises. If the appropriate organizations can be utilized to target this money to help people with their businesses, to help them supply, acquire, distribute, and build the structures that are going to build an economic future. It's like we need to help them learn and the equipment to fish rather than just give them fish. Because when we stop giving the aid, they're going to have nothing but dependency. So it's going to take a concerted effort, a coordinated effort, and right now, the United States has dropped out of that leadership role. The United Nations is going to be the organization that's going to have to organize this. So I don't know what's going to happen. Nobody does. But that seems to make sense to me. So we need to advocate wherever we can. I contribute to some organizations. Oxfam is one. They go in and they build co-ops, they build community organizations. There's others. So individual contributions and then concerted effort from the worldwide economic powers, and hopefully the United States will join in that. All right.
Hanukkah be here today, but she did have a story she wanted to share about her father. And she said I had to read this in her Dutch accent, which I'm not even going to attempt, but you can try to hear it in her accent. So, in 1942, my father, 24 years old, was visiting his parents in Haarlem in the Netherlands. He was the oldest of 9 and had just started as a judge in Amsterdam at 24 years old. When the doorbell rang, my grandfather answered, and 2 Nazis were there. Apparently, one of the siblings was in the resistance, but the Germans did not know who of the Schasma family it was. They wanted to take my grandfather with them, but he was a short-tempered man, so my father said he would go. He was sent to several camps before he landed in concentration camp Buchenwald in Germany. Everyone has heard the horror stories about these camps. In April 1945, Buchenwald was liberated by the Americans. Many children and adults had died because of malnutrition and illnesses. My father and others were transported to Belgium, which with the southern part of Holland had been liberated. They were fed and restored back to health. And during that time, my father wrote letters to his parents. We still have those, and when I read them, it is mostly about food. In June, he was back with his family again, somewhat recuperated. The one thing he brought back with him was his uniform that he wore during the Buchenwald time. My 10-year-old nephew tried it on once, and he was way too big to fit into it. During my childhood and later, there were never any discussions about the concentration camp years. My father had nightmares every night for the rest of his life. On our way to Italy, where we would vacation for 6 weeks, we visited concentration camp Dachau, which is now a museum. She put it in quotes. My father would burst out in all kinds of German curse words. We have also gone to the Eagle's Nest, which was Hitler's hiding place in Berchtesgaden. I probably botched that. A remarkable thing about my dad was that he never hated the Germans. When, for instance, during the World Soccer Cup, the Dutch were out, he always rooted for the Germans. Now, so many years later, it's still baffling to my siblings and me how little we know what he went through, but that's probably a good thing. Now, William, it's your turn.
So, does anybody remember during the AIDS crisis the safety pins? So the safety pins were an indication that you were a safe person to talk to with people who are different. And does anybody know who started or championed that effort? He was on a Star Trek program. Picard, Captain Picard. Who's also known as Sir Patrick Stewart. Stories that I wanted to share. In 2013, he was at the Comic Palooza in Houston, Texas, and a woman named Heather Skye stood at the microphone, her hands trembling. She traveled to say only 2 words: thank you. She was thanking Sir Patrick Stewart at 72, who had already achieved, the a knighthood from Queen Elizabeth, and what he was really great at, Shakespeare, the world's greatest globes. So by measure, he was one of the most celebrated at that time. But Heather wasn't thinking about his fame. 4 years earlier, she had watched a speech that Stewart had given for Amnesty International about violence against women. That speech changed her life. It gave her the courage to name what was happening to her and to finally leave. She asked him, besides acting, what are you most proud of in your life? There was a quiet that rushed over the audience. Stewart paused. Then he spoke about a small village in Yorkshire, England, just after World War II. A regimental sergeant named Alfred Stewart came home from combat, from Dunkirk, carrying something invisible that doctors called shell shock. Today, we call it PTSD. Alfred, he raged. He could not control himself. And he beat his wife, Gladys, a quiet woman with nowhere to go. Patrick was 5 when he first understood what was happening. He remembered the doctors, the ambulance crews, what they said to his mother. You must have provoked him. It takes 2 to meant. And Stewart leaned into the microphone and he said, wrong. My mother did nothing to provoke that. And even if she had, violence is never, ever a choice a man should take. And then something happened that no one expected. Patrick left the stage. He stepped down. He walked through the crowd and he wrapped his arms around Heather. He held her until she could breathe again and whispered words only she could hear. You never have to go through that again. You're safe now. In the early 2000s, he worked with a psychiatrist who worked with combat, sat down with Patrick. The doctor explained everything that Patrick described about his father was textbook PTSD. His father wasn't simply a violent man. He was a wounded man that was never given help. Stewart understood. Not forgiveness exactly. He said that word wasn't quite right, but he understood that his father had been broken by war, by something far larger than himself, and that no one had ever tried to put him back together again. And this was the story of so many of our veterans in so many of our wars. He became a lifelong patronage of Refuge, British charity running safe houses for abused women and children. He visited shelters, he sat with survivors, he raised funds. And then he also became a patron of combat stress, helping military veterans with PSTD. He summed it up in one sentence. He said, I work for Refuge for my mother, and I work for combat stress for my father in equal measure. He never stopped. Through the decades of fame, he chose to keep turning back to that 5-year-old boy in Yorkshire who couldn't help his mother. I do what I do, he said, in my mind, because I couldn't help her then. A little boy could not protect her. The man became decided to spending his life protecting others in her name.
And thank you all for attending today, which is not a joyful ceremony, end joyfully with the birthdays, but our final is from Catherine Cassidy, and I asked her to talk about her work working with war survivors in Kosovo, where she is. So this is from her. I am writing this from Dranis, a small city of 48,000 in the heart of the Drenica Valley of Kosovo, where I serve as a Peace Corps volunteer at the Center for Promotion of Women's Rights, CPWR, alongside its founder and director, Kadiri Tehraj. I swore in just 8 days ago. I am still learning where the light switches are. CPWR exists because Kadiri willed it into existence. For years, she has created space for women who have known violence, displacement, poverty, and silence. Women whose stories were never meant to be told aloud. My counterpart, Anina, CPWR psychologist, speaks beautiful English and sits beside me in meetings, helping me to understand what's being said, and more importantly, what's being felt. Together, the three of us are only beginning to know each other, and for me to only start to learn about the atrocities of the Kosovo War. Kosovo's war lasted from February 1998 until June 1999, when NATO forces entered and the killing stopped. It is estimated that more than 20,000 ethnic Albanian women were victims of sexual violence. For about 26 years afterward, most survivors said nothing. The silent absence, it was wait. Last year, on June 12, 2025, the anniversary of the day NATO troops entered Kosovo war, Oxford University Press published The Strongest Link, an oral history of wartime rape survivors. That publication date was not accidental. 20 Albanian women granted the authors extraordinary access, speaking in their voices about terror, trauma, stigma, and the long, hard work of survival. Scholars have called it one of the most important books of 2025 and 2026. It does something rare. It listens. The Women's History Review said the authors gave women their voices back, and that they succeeded in truly impressive way. I have held this book in my hands already this week, and as I sit in the CPWR office, watching through her day, she already knows what the author spent years learning, that the women who walk through her door are not defined by what was done to them. They are defined by the fact that they kept walking. That brings me to something small and bright that might take shape. I mentioned quietly to Anita and asked her to share this with Kadiri, a simple idea. What if CPWR celebrated 300 birthdays of beneficiaries year-round. Not all at once, but marking each woman's birthday as a way of saying, you are here. You matter. This day belongs to you. In a place feel erased in 1998 and 1999 and still invisible today, a birthday is precious and probably not acknowledged or recognized in many years. If we get this birthday plan going, complete with birthday cards, birthday cakes, and birthday parties once a week for all the women who celebrate birthdays that week, then that's coming a long way since their lives were normal since before the war. Myself, I am a long way today from Whitestone, Virginia. I must thank my UUFR friends who are following me on Facebook, curious about my new Peace Corps life. I am also curious about what will unfold within me as I learn more every day about this post-conflict space, where no family was left untouched and every woman remembers.
Observations about our
I'm not sure why my mother had it, but she had a copy of John Hershey's Hiroshima, which he wrote in 1946, right after the bomb was dropped. And I have it now. And I don't know where she got it from or why she had it, but it's quite an illuminating book about 6 people who were involved in being victims of the bombings and what happened to them on that day, what they were doing on that day, and what happened to them after the bomb was dropped. It got a lot of press when it was published, and it helped turn people in the United States, at least some of them, against dropping any more bombs. I highly recommend it as a reading book because it really is illuminating about what people suffer for someone else's idea about how to end a war. Anyway, it was life-changing for me. So,
Other comments or thoughts?
When we lived in North Carolina, I had a really good friend. She was a friend adversary, a German lady older than I, who remembered the war quite vividly since she lived through it. And she had encountered some pushback in various areas. I heard the church she went to for being German. But this child, who became sort of my Sharon of the day, kept me thinking and on the right track. This child was about 5, and she was in an underground shelter where every time a bomb went off, dirt would fall down through the ceiling, and she would put herself over her younger brother to try to help him out. And what I want to speak to is some that are not considered as war victims are those like Evelyn. Forever, because of her accent and her demeanor, she was pegged as a German. And nobody bothered, even in her own church, to really understand what she'd gone through. She didn't know any better. The German people really didn't see Hitler for what he was for quite some time. Remember people like Evelyn, she's no longer with us, but for the toll that it took on her as a young child in Germany.
I'm going to make an attempt to tell a little story that I wish Lynn were here to tell it because she's the one that experienced it. And I've heard bits and pieces of it over the years. But when she was working at Voice of America, they had many, many people there that were from European countries all over the world that were, they were radio hosts and journalists and what have you. And there was a woman that worked with them, and everybody at VOA, Voice of America, we called her Crazy Layla. And honestly, I don't know what country she was from in Europe, but Lynn would tell the story that whenever there was a big commotion down the hall and she would hear people yelling, it was always Crazy Layla. Well, Crazy Layla spent many years when she was young, I don't know exactly how old, in a concentration camp during the war. And so, like some of the stories I've heard here today, we really don't have any idea of the long lasting impact on people who survive that terrible terror. They were children at the time that survived. I knew another woman that over on Gwen's Island that walked around, and she was German and had the numbers tattooed on her arm from having been in a concentration camp. And you just really have no concept of what those folks endured and how it affected them throughout their entire lives. So I think this was a really interesting program today to focus somewhat on the effects on people that were not actually military, but suffered the impact of wars. I also think we should recognize all of those who have sacrificed their lives in the military to survive, to save our world and our democracy. So thank you.
I want to tell this story because my great-grandfather's not here to tell it, but he used to tell it to me all the time when I was a kid. He fought in World War II. When I say he fought, he was a radio man on a Navy ship in World War II. Before I tell this story, I just want to say I hate Memorial Day. It's been bastardized by people who bring their boats to the beach and leave their beer and their cigarette butts all over the place and get drunk and whatever. But I wanted to tell this story because my great-grandfather used to tell me this, and I used to really, it changed the way I thought about people who fought in wars and how war affected people. But when he was, his ship was kamikazed, and he had, thankfully he wasn't hit, but his crewmates were hit, and he was part of the rescue effort. I mean, it was just his crewmates pulling his other dead crewmates up onto the deck of the ship. But he tells us he was pulling one of his friends up, one of the other radio men, and he couldn't save him because he kept trying to pull him up, and he just kept pulling the skin off of his arm and like couldn't get him on the deck of the ship. And I just, war affects everybody, including, people that fight in it. And I don't remember who said it, but he was a kid. He was 17 at the time, younger than me. And it's crazy to think that, anyway, I just wanted to tell the story because he's not here and he would have told it. So.
So my intention in doing this service today was not to minimize the servicemen that have died, which is what this holiday is for. And I agree with you, Oliver. It is very gauche to say Happy Memorial Day, but you hear that everywhere. It's a somber day to remember people. There's no happy in it. But I think we had made that clear in the promotion of it, is that there's a lot that is for service people. So I wanted to recognize people that weren't normally recognized in that.
I'm reminded of my little brother. We called him Bobby Dean. I'm not sure that that's what he called himself as he grew up. But he, I believe he was a photographer in the Vietnam War. I don't know too much about it because when he came home, he kind of dropped out and disappeared and wasn't a part of the family. And many years we didn't know where he was, or what had happened to him. And then one day I got a phone call from a man who lived in the Outer Banks, and he told me my brother had died of a heart attack, and he was very young at the time. So my sister and I decided that we would go to the celebration of life that they were holding in a bar at Virginia Beach. And we learned so many things about our brother that we never experienced. I mean, he was beloved by the community and beloved by a family that he had adopted, and they had adopted him. And it was like I don't know what happened in the war that where he couldn't like come home and be a part of the family. But I understand that this is not an uncommon side effect of the war. It was just the most amazing experience to hear, to learn about your brother after he died.
I don't have firsthand or secondhand, or I don't have much experience with war, but I listen to a lot of YouTube videos on how to be happy and all of that good stuff. And I know that, and I listened to a talk from the author of The Perfect Pebble, and she was in a concentration camp as a child, and she had maintained her sanity and like happiness from spending all her time like playing games trying to find the perfect pebble despite everything being awful. And there was another famous author who I don't remember the name, but they had found gratitude in the fact that their main camp bed house was so full of fleas that the guards wouldn't come in and bother them. So they were able to actually pray and have some amount of peace despite all of those awful fleas living in their bed. And Viktor Frankl had written that book, Man's Searches for Meaning, and I don't remember his exact connections. Maybe he was in the camps also, but he had helped a lot of people not kill themselves, I think, who had dealt with the war, and he had came up with a little morning ritual called Savers, where it was silence, affirmations, visualization, exercise, reading, and the final S was scribe for writing. And so I just wanted to say that from all the lovely lessons from the people who have survived. I think it's amazing that they were able to stay positive in that way. And yeah, war sucks, and none of it helps the people.
So I wanted to make a comment. If we think about war, which has been carried on for for about 4,000 years, it has come from the head. It has come from power. It has not come from the heart. And one of the things that happens as we share these stories that are not the propaganda that we have been fed and that we were trained and that was in the history books, it is opening up the consciousness on the planet. And so while these things are terrible, There are wonderful things that can come out of that as we shift to the heart. And one day, we will do away with war.